Would it be the worst thing in the world to let the kids play? Let's talk about it. Yes, welcome on in to Braves Today for Friday, January 17th, your source of news, notes, and updates on your Atlanta Braves. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby. You can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Crosby Baseball. You can follow the show on Twitter, Braves_today. We have a Facebook page and Instagram as well. And as always, you can find all my written work, bravestoday.com. That's the Braves Today Substack, as this is both a podcast and a newsletter. And knocking out some questions that we got from you guys on the Friday episode of the show here, I want to get to exactly how risky Jurickson Profar is, right? He's one of the common answers when people want to fill the left field vacancy. I want to get to a really interesting question about which Braves Hall of Famer you would add to this current roster. But first, the other part of the email that we referenced yesterday from Morris. You know, he had asked about Ha-Seong Kim and things like that. The other part of that email was about this offseason as a whole and how it kind of feels like Atlanta is more confident in their depth, their internal depth, and some of their young players specifically, than they are in some of the options in the free agent market. And this is an interesting topic from Morris, and the way I like the way that he words this, okay? He said, one of the paragraphs in here was, I often find myself thinking that teams are often far too impatient with young talent in AAA or with a handful of MLB games under their belt. Having 7 solid spots in the lineup, a stacked bullpen, and a darn good rotation has got to afford some of the long shots, underdogs, and prospects some extra big league leeway. Is it time to let the kids play? And I agree that fans, sometimes teams, are too quick to write a guy off based off of brief struggles at the major league level, or even at the AAA level, right? We've seen a lot of the fan base is out on AJ Smith-Shawver, despite how young he is, despite the fact that he was so inexperienced as a pitcher in general when he came up. He's now pitched in 2 postseasons for you already, and he's just now getting to the point where he would be draft eligible as a college player, right? So let's go through some of the most likely contributors amongst the prospects and young players and what it would have to look like for them to play significant roles this season, both from a alternatives standpoint and from a what they need to do standpoint. And I just mentioned AJ Smith-Shawver, but I want to start with Nacho Alvarez because I feel like there's a little bit of maybe misunderstanding based on how I've talked about Nacho Alvarez, where people think that I think he's a bust and he's not going to work out. And that's not necessarily the case, right? There is a lot of things that Nacho Alvarez does offensively that are very good, right? He is legitimately a good player and deserves to be in the team's top 10 prospects. A lot of my concerns have been with what I've seen defensively and my thoughts on his ability to stick at the major league level, knowing that the Braves prefer strong defenders over maybe, above average offensive players at those key positions, right? At shortstop, at center field, where thankfully you have a guy who can do both, at catcher, right? The fact that they traded away William Contreras to get Sean Murphy tells you they value defense over offense at behind the plate. And so a lot of what I have talked about when it comes to Nacho Alvarez has been not necessarily thinking he's going to work out because of the defense. I do think it's entirely possible to acknowledge defense on prospects does get better as they move up through the minors. There's always going to be those kids that are just amazing defenders no matter what. your Pete Crow Armstrong has always been an exceptional center field defender. But so often, you see even the kids that are good defenders struggle at the lower levels, and as they move up, they get better. That's kind of an accepted development path when it comes to prospects. And even when they get to the majors, you see them get better, say, year 1 to year 2. Bobby Witt Jr. is a great example of this. He really struggled defensively his first year, to the fact where I'm pretty sure he graded out, if not neutral, maybe even a little bit negative as a defender his first year. Second year, he was one of the best shortstop defenders in the league, right? Like, it was that significant of an improvement, of a change from year to year. And the thing with Nacho Alvarez is some of my concerns were his range and what that can do, or his speed and what that can do to his range at shortstop. Now, I will say a lot of the other aspects that go into being a good shortstop, he's got, right? He has the hands. They're reliable, the soft hands to make the transfers. He's got the body control. He's got the arm strength. I feel like the instincts are coming. Like, he is showing development and better understanding where the ball is going to go, what's going to happen and everything. And I do think, like, Orlando Arcia has shown you don't have to have great speed to have good range. And a lot of that ends up coming down to your instincts to pre-play positioning and things like that. And that absolutely can improve. So I think the situation where Nacho Alvarez sticks as a major leaguer is if he gets the opportunity. Let's say Orlando Arcia gets hurt and he gets the opportunity to play and can show the ranges there for shortstop, because I believe he can do everything else. And the overall body of work wasn't great at the major league level. It was 8 games and 30 at-bats. But in AAA last year, in half of a season, he batted .297 with an .861 OPS. And there are things he does really well. The power isn't exceptional, right? I talked about 90th percentile exit velocity of 101 compared to an MLB average of 103, but zone contact rate of 90% in AAA last year. Chase rate just barely around 20%, right? He's not swinging too much, 41% swing rate. Now, zone swings, he's a little passive there sometimes, 60% zone swing rate, so he's taking pitches, and I still feel like a little bit of too much of a ground ball issue, 46% ground ball rate last year in AAA. But Nacho Alvarez absolutely shows the ability. I mean, he ran a 12.5% walk rate, right? He shows the ability to be a 15-homer bat who can play at least average defense, run a good on base at the major league level. I think that's what you end up having to see for Nacho Alvarez to stick at the major league level. But him also being able to do that gives you a lot more flexibility as you enter 2026, right? Similarly, AJ Smith-Shawver sticking in the rotation would be a huge deal for this team. Talked about him a few times. I think one of the big issues that you saw last year, why there was so much inconsistency in the minors, was Atlanta messing around with his slider shapes, right? We've talked about this a little bit in the past, but he was throwing kind of a gyro slider. The Braves tried to swap him over to a sweeper, and it just really wasn't the right shape for his motor preferences, okay? So wasn't doing a ton of stuff. And I personally feel like when he was throwing the sweeper, for some reason, his fastball felt like it regressed a little bit. Like it wasn't necessarily getting as much riding life up in the zone and things like that. I still think the gyro slider and the high ride fastball is the best combo for him, but the changeup absolutely took leaps last year, where I would probably argue it's his third best pitch instead of the curveball being the third best pitch, right? The slider can kind of look like a cutter. You've got the changeup, which kind of had a little bit of like split movement to it. And provided that the command is there, AJ Smith-Shawver, I don't think it would be a Spencer Schwellenbach type year, but I absolutely think he's athletic enough. He's got the arsenal of pitches where he could come up and stick at the major league level all year. So, like, there's a path to some of these young players contributing in meaningful ways in Atlanta in 25. And to Morris's point, I think that Atlanta likes, it's not just do you like your in-house players more so than the free agents. It's do you like your in-house players at their cost versus the free agents at their cost. If you ask me right now, would I rather have AJ Smith-Shawver at the league minimum or Jordan Montgomery at $22.5 million? AJ Smith-Shawver 7 days a week and Sunday after church, right? I would not mind adding Jordan Montgomery. I don't think he's $22 million better than AJ Smith-Shawver, right? So that's the calculus you have to have. You know, do I think it'd be fun to add a shortstop like a Ha-Seong Kim? Yes. Do I think he's $20 million better or $18 million better than Orlando Arcia? Probably not. So I understand why, and there's the risk of the injury. Do I think he's $22 million better than Nacho Alvarez? Probably not. You know, so there is a calculus you have to make. And letting the kids play, one, helps you reset the CBT so that you can go spend more money next offseason. And if they don't, that will be, oh boy, will Braves country be mad. But also, I like some of this in-house young talent. Drake Baldwin, I think, is going to be a star in the league. I think he is, from an offensive perspective, he could be a guy like the next William Contreras. And you'll have the DH role open. It's going to be a similar situation where he'll play behind the plate some, he'll DH some, Murphy's going to DH plenty in 26. I absolutely see where you can have two studs back there. Murphy's the better defender, Baldwin's the better hitter. I love it. So, fantastic there. In just a second, I had a great question from somebody close to me about the Hall of Famer for the Braves you'd most want to add to this lineup. We'll get to that next, right here on Braves Today. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Underdog Fantasy. We've partnered with them. The link is in the episode description. Promo code BRAVES to sign up. They'll give you a free play up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you fund your account. Fantastic setup that they have here. They're available almost the entirety of Braves country. Sorry to our friends in Mississippi, but outside of there, they're available almost everywhere else. Georgia, obviously. South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, Florida. I know I have a bunch of family in North Florida that are Braves fans as well because of TBS. Shout out TBS. So, the way this works is you go in and craft a lineup based on statistical projections for the players. We're looking at the playoffs this weekend and higher or lower on what they're going to do. My three-player lineup this weekend. I checked the weather in Buffalo. It's supposed to be cold, like 20 degrees, but no snow is expected. So I've got both Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. I'm taking higher on their combined passing and rushing yards. So 289.5 combined for Josh Allen, 278.5 combined for Lamar Jackson. And my third pick takes advantage of a really fun feature that Underdog has called vulture protection. I'm taking Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions higher than his projection of 1.5 rushing and receiving TDs. Because the way the vulture protection works, if he gets a carry on the drive, they get inside the 10, and then a non-running back scores the touchdown, right? They give it to Amon St. Ra on an end around. Something like that. If a non-running back gets the rushing TD instead of Gibbs, in essence, they credit him with getting the touchdown anyway, right? It's vulture protection. If he carries the ball on the drive, but a non-running back rushes the TD in, he gets credit as if he scored it anyway. I almost feel like you kind of can't lose on that, especially because you can get him as low as 0.5. If he carries a ball on the drive and then anybody rushes a TD in, he gets credit. So I've taken these three. You can win up to 1,000 times your money on this. The combination of these three players for me has come out to, if all three hit, around 11 times my money. So 11 units back on a 1 unit play. So again, go to Underdog Fantasy, links in the episode description, promo code BRAVES to get a free play and up to $1,000 in bonus cash with your first deposit. Let us know if you're tailing, if you have a better package for us, and we'll see what happens on Monday. Welcome back to Braves Today. Lindsay Crosby answering some of your questions from this week. We talked about letting the kids play. Thank you to Morris for that email. This question actually came from my wife. She insisted I give her credit on this. We were talking about the lineup, which is just over dinner yesterday. And she said, which Braves Hall of Famer in their prime would you add to this current roster? What a question, right? The obvious and easy answer is Hank Aaron. And so she kind of threw, let's add the greatest power hitter in baseball history to this lineup. And so she said, all right, well, let's take out Hank Aaron because that's really easy to say Hank Aaron. And so if you take out Hank Aaron, it's a really interesting conversation of who you would add to this lineup. Obviously, you have the big three, right? You have Maddox, you have Smoltz, you have Glavine. Adding one of those pitchers is really appealing to this current lineup, right? Greg Maddux would make any team better. Adding John Smoltz, friend of the show, by the way. We've interviewed John Smoltz on the show before, I have. Would give you either another great back-end reliever or a dominant starter. But unlike a lot of people, I'm pretty confident in what the pitching staff can do this year. I think I would add prime Chipper Jones to this lineup, okay? So I'm defining his prime as 96 through 22, so ages 24 through 30. He was mostly a third baseman, but he did play left field in 2002. He played the entire season in left field. So I'm going to go ahead and put him in left. I do think while Austin Riley would probably move to left field, I do think that Chipper was probably a better left fielder than Austin Riley was. And so think about this. From 96 through 02, Chipper Jones was worth 4.1 WAR. He was a 5-time All-Star who won an MVP, won 2 Silver Sluggers, and was, I think, 6 additional times in the top 10 or 11 of MVP voting, right? He hit 315, 411, 556 in that stretch. So a 967 OPS and a 147 OPS plus. He had 230 home runs and 106 stolen bases. So what this would mean is that once Ronald came back, your starting outfield would be Ronald Acuna Jr. in right, Michael Harris in center, Chipper Jones in left, with Jared Kelenic and Brian De La Cruz. One of them gets optioned down to the minors, probably Brian De La Cruz, with Jared Kelenic as your backup outfielder. Probably carry Eli White as well to run and stuff and do defense late in games. And then the lineup for that, I got to figure out how you structure that lineup, right? Ronald Acuna Jr. leads off. Do you bat, instead of batting Ozzie second, I think you bat Chipper Jones second, right? He's not as fast at that point in his career as Ronald Acuna Jr. is. You want Ronald lead off. It's the vibes. It's the threats right on the pitcher right away. So you bat Ronald Acuna Jr. lead off. Chipper Jones bats second. Austin Riley, Matt Olson, Marcell Ozuna. Maybe put Ozzie Albies 6th, and then you have Sean Murphy. Like I'm trying to get all of this stuff here. If you have Ozzie Albies 6th, Sean Murphy 7th, Orlando Arce, like it's probably the greatest single addition you could make to this roster. Now, maybe I'm forgetting somebody. Maybe I'm not thinking of a specific player that would do a great job on this team. Let me know if you have somebody different, or if you think it should be one of those big three pitchers. Make the argument why Greg Maddux or John Smoltz or Tom Glavine would be a bigger add than adding the bat of Chipper Jones in left field. I want to hear from you. In just a second, I had a question come in about Jurickson Profar. And we did a show on him a couple weeks ago about how I'm pretty convinced that his changes are real. But somebody else asked, how can we be sure? And I'll tell you next, right here on Braves Today. Final segment of Braves Today on Friday, January 17th, answering your questions. We were asked about Jurickson Profar. I did a show, I want to say it was right before Christmas, because I think the thumbnail was Jurickson Profar in a Santa hat. There you go. Talking about why the Braves should sign Jurickson Profar. And I talked about it felt like a lot of his mechanical and approach changes were real. You know, he absolutely did intentionally try to hit the ball harder. You know, like it was an approach change, but the mechanical changes, changing his handset, changing leg kick versus a toe tap, all that kind of stuff to get more power. And I happened to see an article on Wednesday from Mike Petriello of MLB.com. I affectionately refer to him as StatCast Man. He is in charge of StatCast for MLB. He's the head of that team. Every time they introduce a new stat, they put bat tracking in there. They expanded stolen bases and base running. They broke it out into different components. All of that stuff. Mike Petriello is the guy who does that. He's the guy in charge of those projects. He's in charge of the data set for StatCast. He's the one that mines StatCast for all this info. And he wrote an article on Wednesday that was, in essence, answering that same question. And he talked about how much should we believe in Jurickson Profar. His first 10 seasons were a combined 4.9 WAR. In 2024, he had 4.3 WAR by itself. And in the article, Petriello mentions Cody Bellinger, how he had that resurgent year in 23 to get the contract and then didn't live up to it in 24, right? But Petriello agrees with me that this is sustainable, right? Profar's hard hit percentile in his career, the highest he had been in the last, 6-7 years was 23%. It jumped up to 71% in 2024. And hard hit rate is not a thing you can fake, right? That's not a thing that that is the result of misreads and you can get lucky and have a hard hit rate jump that much. You will see year-to-year variation in hard hit rate, but it's a lot less than that much. And some of the arguments that he uses that this wasn't a fluke was he looks at the actual versus expected stats to see how lucky did he get. So Jurickson Profar, 280 average, and then the weighted OBA was 365, okay? His expected average was 282. His weighted OBA was 364. So he did exactly what the inputs said he should do. And the comparison here, he said, where Cody Bellinger was different, was Cody Bellinger significantly outperformed his expected stats. The weighted OBA was 43 points between his actual and his expected in 23, which was one of the largest gaps in the game. And that is statistically likely to come back together in a future year. Regression to the mean in this situation. So Profar, by comparison, had this hard hit rate. He added, it was the largest single jump in hard hit rate for any player in baseball. But his strikeout rate dropped while he did it. It's also, it wasn't platoon dependent, right? He had an 885 OPS as a righty. He had an 823 OPS as a lefty. He did slump in August a little bit, but outside of that, he was good every single month. It wasn't something where a hot couple weeks carried his profile, or a few massive games with multi-home runs carried his profile. Travis d'Arnaud's a guy where like 7 of his home runs from last year came in 3 total games. And so, based on, one, the inputs, none of it was lucky. His batting average on balls in play was around 300, wasn't even in the top 50, right? There were at least 50 players who had a higher batting average on balls in play. Another aspect, I think I touched on this when we talked about this as well, is he worked with Fernando Tatis Sr. on the mechanical impacts, or the mechanical changes that he needed to do. And it's not something where he flukily added a bunch of bat speed, which could physically regress at any time. His bat speed was within less than 1 mile an hour different from the year before. It was all these mechanical changes that got him into better launch angles, got him better timing on the balls, and all of that stuff. And so, to me, Jurickson Profar is not as risky as a lot of people think. I'm not saying he's a slam dunk, right? Every single player has some risk. But when you look at the changes that he made, they are all, it's easy to understand what he did and how it helped. And you can see how it wasn't, none of his production last year was driven by luck, right? It was all, he had elite inputs and it translated into elite outputs. I think the only blue you see on his offensive stats on StatCast is his sweet spot percentage is below average. Everything else is red. His chase rate, 90th percentile. His whiff rate, 90th percentile. His strikeout rate, 88th percentile. His walk rate, 89th percentile. His expected batting average, again, 282, 92nd percentile. Average exit velocity, 80th percentile. Like, all of these things are bright red on StatCast. And according to StatCast man himself, they weren't luck. They were, he made mechanical and approach changes, and you got the exact results you expected to see from those changes. So, yes, there's concerns on if he can keep it up. He's 31 years old. Yes, there's concerns. His range isn't great. And so because of that, he's not an amazing defender, although his arm strength is above average. I think in left field, he would be fine for the Braves. There wouldn't be a ton of concerns to have him in left field. Is Jared Kelenic a better defender than him? Yes. Would I much rather have Kelenic and Brian De La Cruz platooning in right and Profar in left to open the year than I would Kelenic and Brian De La Cruz in the 2 corners? Also, yes. Again, Brian De La Cruz has options. You can send him down when Acuna's back. And Profar, Acuna, Harris, and Kelenic can be your 4 outfielders. And Kelenic can rotate in for defense and platoon with somebody if guys need days off. You want to get, and that also would give you a more reliable pinch hitter off the bench. Because right now, you don't really have a go-to pinch hitter off the bench. So, again, I'm okay with Jurickson Profar. I understand why AA or some other people might not be. And AA did mention a week or two ago on 680 The Fan, if you're not 100% sure, you should just date him versus getting married. And by that, he means a short-term deal. I don't know if Jurickson Profar would sign a short-term deal. If he would, I would be open to that. I would be open to a 3-year deal. Could maybe be talked into, I don't want to give him a 4-year deal, but maybe a club option for a 4th year. Either way, I do think that Jurickson Profar is safer than maybe you realize. And the good thing is, StatCast man agrees with me. This has been Braves Today for Friday, January 17th. Reminder, If you're watching football this weekend, Underdog Fantasy, links in the episode description, promo code BRAVES. Feel free to tail. Feel free to send us in your slips. Whoever does the best, I want to hear about it. We'll talk about it on Monday's show in their segment. In the meantime, if you have questions for us, I'm on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. You can email us, contact@bravestoday.com. Until next time, this has been Braves Today.